I'm alive now, he said. Father, by the way, this morning at Mass, if you were here, he said to us about welcoming and celebrating both St. Patrick's and St. Joseph's. Irish or Italian? Both? Oh, you're the Joseph. Irish and Joseph. The sister I work with, a bishop over in Connecticut, saw her name tag, Carol Giuliano. And he said, oh, you're Irish and Italian, just like me. Gaelic and Gallic. I thought that was pretty good. What I'd like us to do to start off this morning is I mentioned from the altar the other day that during retreat, I believe God will give you whatever you need. So I want you to take just a minute or two and take a little bit of time just to think about what are the graces that you want God to give you during this retreat. It may be something for you. It may be something in terms of your family or just in our society in general. What is it you want as a grace? And just spend a moment or two with God and just talk to God about that. God bless you. Yesterday we talked about being filled with life and joy and hope. I hope you did some more reflection when you got home yesterday, thinking about how you're being called to be more joyful, more hopeful, more filled with life. Is there anything left over from yesterday that anybody wanted to mention? Any questions, any thoughts, any insights from yesterday that anybody wanted to mention? Other than that, anything else? Then we'll move on. Today I want to talk about the fact of what do people look like when they are filled with hope and joy and life. One time when I was teaching at Notre Dame, all of us who were there for the program teaching were on a panel, and we were asked a question. What do we need to do as a church to change, to be what we should be as a church? And one by one, all of us who were the presenters at this program got up there and said what we were thinking. Oh, we have to do this and we have to do that. And right in the middle of all of this, I realized that I know most of these people on the panel, and I know what they think. And yet, I get up there, they get up there, and we say what needs to happen if we're really going to be a change. I said, we're not the right people. I said, who are the right people to tell us how we have to change? And so it was a very simple decision. Find people who live their lives in such a way that they really witness what it means to be a Christian by the way they live their life. That's it. It's as simple as that. So I went out, three of us, I guess, did the project. No, two of us. It was a man who worked for AT&T and myself. And we went out and we interviewed 42 people, women and men, in different types of life. There was a guy who's laid tile. There was a couple of lawyers. There was a director of movies. It ran the whole gamut. Two hairdressers. And I'll tell you about one of them in a moment. From all walks of life, one nurse, one doctor. One of the things the doctor said to me, he said, medicine is all about competency and compassion. And I thought, shouldn't that be true for any of us in whatever role we are? To be both competent and compassionate. I know I've begun to look at that in terms of my own life and say, how can I become more of both of those? We interviewed them. The way we got the names is people would say to us, I would tell people about the project, and people would say, I know just the person you have to interview. We had a man here last night who just, in answering a question, talked about the culture in his business. And it was just amazing. As I listened to him, finally I said, I want to meet your boss. And he said, I'm the boss. And so I had him share a little bit with the group last night. Was anybody here last night? Yeah, a couple of you. I was just amazed by what he said and how the culture of his community, the way he has fostered that. So we interviewed the 42 people. The very first person I interviewed, and the very first question we asked each of them, what are your values? When you get up every day and when you go to work, what are your values? The very first person I interviewed taught at a university, a state university. She had taught at a state university. Her name was Pat. And when I asked Pat, I said, Pat, what are your values? And after I heard her speak, I discovered, listening to others, that the major value of the people who lived their lives in such a way that people said they're Christians is they were people of integrity. They had to do the right thing regardless of the consequences. With Pat, this was the story. She was 1 year away from getting tenure. She got tenure, she's set for the rest of her life. She's a single woman, and she needed, if she got tenure, she'd be set. She has that job forever. She saw something going on in the department, and she went and she challenged the dean. It was unjust what was going on. The students were suffering from it. So she went and she challenged him, and she lost her job. It was that simple. I said, Pat, knowing what happened to you now, would you still do the same thing if you incurred the same issue in the past, in the future? She said, of course. I couldn't live with myself otherwise. She was a person of integrity. That was the number one issue when I asked people what was their values. There was another man I interviewed. His name was Jack. Jack was a movie director and a television director. And he told me the story. He said, mainly I was doing television in those days, and he said, they handed me a script that I could be director of this movie. And he said, I took it home and I sat with my wife, Pat. Pat, by the way, was also in the media. She did script writing. She used to write for programs like All in the Family and those programs. And she said to me, every time I write a script, I try to bring my Christian values into it. It was just absolutely beautiful. A couple of the programs that she wrote, she just brought it right into it. That was her ministry. That's what she did. But Jack, her husband, got this script and he brought it home and he talked to Pat and he was all excited about it. And then the more they talked about it, he said, you know, this is the exact opposite. They are extolling these teenagers in this movie. And it's the exact opposite of what we are trying to teach our children. So he took the script back the next day, handed it to the producer. He said, I'm not going to do it. It could have advanced his career in so many ways, but he had to do the right thing, regardless of the consequences. Later in his life, he was elected the president of the American Directors Guild. It's the highest he could be in his profession. And I remember the year after he died, watching the Oscars, and I saw his picture up there. And I called Pat the next day, just to congratulate her. And she said it's so nice to see how he is honored not only by the profession, but for the way he lived his life. I was doing a parish mission like this in New Jersey. By the way, you look so serious this morning. I was working with the community up in Canada, and they told me they had a priest who did parish missions all the time. He went out and gave them. But they said he would get carried away. And they said one day he was giving a mission, he said, if you do not get better, if you do not grow, you will go to hell where there is the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. Right here where he was sitting, there was a woman sitting in front of him, grinning. He got so excited. He said, did you hear me? If you do not repent, you will go to hell where is the weeping and gnashing of teeth. She kept on grinning. He got so frustrated, walked out, stood right in front of her, said the same thing, and she said, but I don't have any teeth. And he got so frustrated, he said, teeth will be provided. Yeah, I like to see the joyful faces. I was doing a parish mission in New Jersey, and I asked the people to share. And we were talking about this issue of integrity. And there were two men sitting about 3 rows in. And I remember the first one, I asked them what to share back with the larger group, and they did. First man said that he worked on Wall Street. He said there was a contract that had come in, millions of dollars, millions. And he said, I read through, and he said, the president of the organization came to me and said, but look, I want you to do certain things that were both illegal and immoral. And he said, I won't do it. He gave up millions of dollars because he had to do the right thing. And the guy sitting right next to him was also in the finance business. And he said, we had a similar situation in my company. He said, the people in our company were working together around a project that was really going to make our company go up big. And he said, but when I listened to what they were talking about and what they wanted me to do, I said, no, I can't do that. He told me that 40 of his men, 40 of the top executives were brought before a grand jury. 39 of them ended up being put in jail. He was the only one who wasn't, because he lived what he believed. I want you to think for a moment, who is the person that you believe, that you have met, that is the person of integrity, true integrity, who does the right thing regardless of the consequences? I'm not going to ask you to share this one, but I just want you to think about it. Do you know somebody, or are you even here tonight with maybe a spouse who you believe is like that? But just take a moment and think about that. I think I used this prayer at one of the masses, but I don't think I used them at all on Sunday. Cardinal O'Fee, the primate of all Ireland. I met him only once, but wonderful man. Went to the Synod on the laity in Rome. And it was on the laity, and each bishop would get up, and they had 8 minutes. That's as much as they would give them, because they know they get carried away. And after 8 minutes, just to give what's called an intervention. Cardinal O'Fee stood up in front of the other bishops, and he said, Paddy O'Shea was a man who went to church. He never missed a Sunday. But when he died, he went to hell for what he did on Monday. And then he sat down. That was it. And that's what integrity is about. What do you do, those of you who are still working? Do you bring that as your value? And what other values that really move you every day? So that was the first question we asked people. We said, what are your values? We asked people, where did their values come from? Think about this for yourself. If I were to ask you and have interviewed you, what would you say are your values? And where do your values come from? I get in trouble for this one, but I'll tell you why in a moment. I get in trouble if I share this. Let me hold that one for last. For a lot of them, it came from somebody else in the workplace. For some of the people, they said, I had a boss, and I said if I could ever be in charge, I would be just like that person. Some of the people also, their values came from the workplace, but it was just the opposite. I had a boss, and I made a decision that if I was ever in charge of anything, I would never be like that. The issue that came up most, and this is what gets me in trouble, when I ask people, what is the source of your values? Where did they come from? Overwhelmingly, it was the father. Now, when I share that sometimes, people look at me, particularly women, and say, what are you saying? And I remember working in a diocese, and I said that, and they got all upset with me. They came back a year later to do something with them, and they said, we've been thinking about that. And we believe that most of us, our values came from our father, but it was the mother who nurtured them. I thought that's probably true. But think again for yourself. Where did my values come from? Where did my values come from? The third area was reflection on experience. It's different experiences they had, but they took time to reflect on it and say, what is God teaching me through this? I asked them, where do they find stress in their lives? Where do we find stress in their lives? There were only two areas. They had a tough time finding stress in their lives. It was amazing. I think people of integrity don't have a lot of stress, I think. I believe in stressors and stress. You're going to have stress. Hans Selye, the mastermind of stress, said the absence of stress is death. So you're going to have stress. Just get that straight. The two areas that they found that there was stress for them, one of them was in earning enough money with whatever they were doing to be able to share it with others. And the second one is if they ever had to fire somebody, they found that very stressful. I asked them a question. I said, do you see what you do as ministry? Now, whatever it is you do or did, those who are retired, did you see what you were doing every day as your ministry? What people told me when I interviewed them, it's my ministry, it's my mission, it's my walk with God. And they knew that what they were doing every day was God's work. They were being faithful to where they were being called. I remember one of the hairdressers. I said to her, do you see what you're doing as ministry? She said, I'm not sure what you mean by ministry. So I explained a little bit. She said, it must be. She said, all I ever wanted to be in life was a mother and a hairdresser. So it must be my ministry. And then she said, I said to her, what do you think ministry is? And she said, touching another person in a positive way. Now think of what she does as a hairdresser. You know, I work with theologians. I've never heard anybody give a better description of ministry than what she said. Touching another person in a positive way. When I asked them, where do you get your support? Overwhelmingly, the men canonize their wives. Overwhelmingly. None of the wives canonize their husbands, I have to tell you that, okay? Overwhelmingly, the men, in fact, I had men who would send me 2- and 3-page letters afterwards, just telling me all about their wives. That's where they got their sense of support from. You think now, I'm going to go back over these questions to ask you to think about yourself. When we finished those interviews, that's this book called Listening to the Wisdom of God's People, The Collaborative Leader. I said to him, I want to find out what we need to say to the leaders in the church today. First, they said we have to be people of integrity. That was the strongest. The second thing they said is we have to get outside the four walls, that the church has become two of what's Avery Dulles referred to as theologian, as we have become too internal, where we are called as a Christian community to go out those doors and bring Christ to every place we go. Feed the flock. The only way you're going to be able to feed people is knowing what they need. Listening. And be collaborative. Work together. Collaboration. Collaboration is a funny concept. One time when I was working in Northern Ireland, I saw on the wall, collaborators will be shot. I said it may not be such a great idea after all. So ask yourself, now I want you to take a few moments in reflection. What are my values? What are the things that are so important to me that I will do them whatever happens? Jack did not get the film. Pat had lost her job. But I should tell you about Pat, that after she lost her job, she was the nutritional coach for one of the professional hockey teams. But because she left her job, she had to completely change what she was doing in life. In the last few years, she's worked with over 500,000 people in the government or in the military. God moved her by losing her job. She felt called to where she belonged. What are your values? Where did your values come from? Where did your values come from? I'm only going to do a couple of them. Where do you get your support in living your Christian life? Where does your support come from? And do you see, or did you see, if you're retired, do you see what you do as ministry? As this is where God is calling me. This is where God is putting me with the gifts that God has given me to be able to change whatever I can. If I were to ask you, would you recommend somebody to me who lives their life in such a way that people say that's what it means to be a Christian? Picture somebody. Can you picture somebody who has struck you that way? Think about that person. And think about how you would describe that person. What you think would be their answers to the questions I raised. So just take a moment. Picture that person. Think about that person. Dialogue with that person right here. Let me invite you then, just for a couple of minutes, if you're comfortable, turn to that person sitting near you and just tell them about the person you're thinking of. See, I want you to get that person's type, that person's into your head. Just for a minute or two, if you feel comfortable. Talk about that. 1 minute more. Okay, 1 more minute. Can I get your attention back, please? Thank you. Before I take back some of your responses, I know I told this last night, but I don't think I told it yesterday morning. A little story about San Diego. Did I tell it yesterday morning? Okay. My mentor, he was a Jesuit priest psychiatrist. And Jim, when he was doing his internship in medicine out in Milwaukee, he found out that one of his brother Jesuits had just been operated on. So he found the nurse from the recovery room and he said, "How's Father so-and-so doing?" And she said, "He's doing fine." But did he grow up around the water? And Jim said, by the way, that's my New York accent, water. Did he grow up around the water? And Jim said, well, he did. He grew up in San Diego. And he said, "But why do you ask?" And the nurse said, every time when he was coming out of the anesthesia, he just kept saying, "Beware the whitecaps, beware the whitecaps." And Jim started smiling. He said when they were in the seminary, they had a professor who said to them, "You guys have to be careful. After you're ordained, all the women are going to be after you, especially the nurses. Beware the whitecaps." Now that's a true story. But that's how sometimes our what's called an ego, alter ego, just pops up. Can I get a couple just briefly? Just tell us a little bit about the person you were thinking of. Again, yeah, go ahead. Way in the back, can I ask you to stand up? We'll hear you better. A little bit louder.
I was thinking of Rosa. She's someone who helps me with the Open Hearts Ministry for people with disabilities here. And she particularly seeks out families, Spanish-speaking families with children who could be adult children with disabilities who have not received the sacraments or had a welcoming church. And she gives of her time and her heart freely, and she's constantly listening.
She's constantly? Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
My name's Dave. I was thinking of a deacon in my church. I go to an Orthodox Presbyterian church in Chula Vista, and I actually teach him New Testament Greek. And he's a person of integrity. He is the same person all the time, not just when he goes to church. And there have been times when I was low on food, and we went to the grocery store, and he bought me food.
Wow. When you were talking, for some reason, popped back into my mind from the Mass this morning, Feast of St. Joseph. And Joseph was a just man. And you think about the fact that he was going to put Mary away. But the angel appeared. The right thing to do was not to do that. He was a just man, and he's a model for all of us. I want to move on to an area that I find, if I want to know where God is calling me in ministry, what God is calling me to be and do, I have to know what my gifts are. I have to know what my gifts are. What are your gifts? Matthew 5. You are the light of the world. That's directed at you, each of us. You are the light of the world. Don't take that light and put it, those gifts, and put them under a bushel basket. Let your light shine so that when people see your gifts, your light, they will give glory to our God in heaven. Not to us, but to our God in heaven. My experience is I have never met anybody who's fully in touch with their gifts. Never. Why do people have such a tough time being able to identify their gifts? Why is it people have such a tough time, maybe you don't, but the majority of people do, such a tough time being able to use their gifts, to acknowledge them and to use them? What gets in the way? Anybody? Yeah. What gets in the way?
I have to attribute this to Father Michael Hyams, one of my favorite theologians. But Father Michael Hyams talked about, it goes back to Genesis, and God says, I created this and it's good, and I created this and it's good. And then he creates humans and he says, this is very good. And I think that we have a hard time connecting with our very goodness because it makes us intimate with God.
Yeah.
And it's kind of scary.
Yep. You have identified a whole number of them there. Let me see if I can pick them up. Let me ask a question, not just of you, but of everybody. When you were a child, were you encouraged to use your gifts? Or if you began to say what's good about me, to acknowledge them, did people have a false sense of humility? Don't say that. You know, it's being proud if I acknowledge my gifts. One time, one of the major obstacles, and I'm going to pick up the ones that you just said, but I wanted to ask that. The major obstacle is a false humility. That rather than what the gospel says, let them shine, I think many of us probably were taught, no, put them down, hide them, hide them. One time I was doing a program, and before it had begun, we were in the lunch line. And there was a woman standing in front of me who had the most beautiful eyes I have ever seen. She also looked like a young Farrah Fawcett. She was absolutely beautiful. And I went up to her, I said, would you do me a favor? And she looked at me, she said, what? And I said, when you catch me staring at you for the rest of the week, would you just ignore me? Now, let me tell you, be quiet why. When I see women with beautiful eyes, two things happen to me. I stutter and I dribble. And I can't help it. And so when I said that to her, I said, you have the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen. And she said, thank you, they're a gift. An interesting response? Yeah. I had to go talk to her later, but actually I was looking for a reason to go talk to her later. And I said, that's a fascinating response. She said, when I was growing up, my mother always told people, don't tell her she has beautiful eyes, she'll get proud. She said, when I became an adult, I realized that humility is truth. And the truth is that God gave me beautiful eyes, so now I do everything to make them even more beautiful. That's the attitude we need to have. We look at that, what you said that Father Hyams said to you, that whole idea of just, we are good. And everything in us that God has put there is good. Sometimes our gifts are so much a part of us that we can't even see them. We just think this is how everybody is. I was working with a pastoral council one time, and I said to one of the men, what are your gifts? He said, I have no gifts. And immediately the whole congregation looked at him and said, you have the gift of joy. Anytime you walk into a room, the room gets lit up. We experience the joy of the Lord. Your joy is contagious. And he said, I never thought about that as a gift. He said, I even smile at stop signs. You know, sometimes our gifts are so much a part of us, everybody else can see it, and we can't. And one of the other things he said is, are you giving me a message?
No, you said you smile at stop signs. So
I thought he was saying to me, stop, shut up. You're supposed to go like this if you want me to stop. Thank you. But you shared about the fact how if I find out I have a gift, I have to use it. And there's fears. There's lots of fears. I have to change. I can't just continue doing what I'm comfortable with, but maybe God's calling me in new ways. Take a moment and just ask yourself, what prevents me from knowing the fullness of my gifts? What gets in my way of being able to say, God, thank you for the gifts you've given me? What do you believe about gifts? What do you believe about gifts? I'll tell you some of my beliefs, and somebody wants to add some after that. I believe that every single person created by God is gifted and called. Gifted and called. Every one of us. You realize how alive parishes would be if everybody in the parish came forth and said, these are my gifts. How can I put them at the service of this community, this church? Yeah. I believe every single person. Think of the last person you talked to. Was right here in the church. What gifts do you see in that person? When you begin to believe that every single person is a gifted and a called person, anytime you meet somebody, the first thing you say is gifts. And you look. Who's the one person in this parish you hope moves back to the East Coast soon? You know, who's that person you have the most trouble with? And can you look at that person and say, what gifts do I see in that person? My brother, I think I told you, yes, I did. In my family, my brother was a brother. My mother said, I have 3 sons and 2 of them are brothers. But my brother had bypass surgery twice. And the first time he had it, the doctor said to my mother and I, this man is working on about 10% of his total capacity. That's why he's always tired. I believe that most parishes are only using at the most 10% of the gifts that God has placed there. And that's why sometimes we have a very tired and anemic church, because we're not using all the gifts that God has given to us. All gifts are given to us, as St. Paul tells us, to be used for the building up of the community. Not the community right, yes, the community right here, but also that larger community outside these doors. All gifts you have, and no gift you were ever given was given to you just for yourself. Every gift you have was been given to you to be shared. Gifts change. I am the director of the retirement house for our older and sick priests and brothers. Their gifts used to be the very active gifts of all the things they did. Now they can't do those anymore. And their gifts change. And their gifts become more of listening and compassion and things like that. Do you ever watch somebody who used to be a great teacher, is still in the classroom, can't stand kids? Gifts change. And when your gift change, your call changes. I used to have the gift of working with youth. I still get together with the kids I worked with. Now, that's over 60 years ago I worked with them. Over 60 years. And I still call them the kids. And I meet with them occasionally. Mainly they call me up when there's someone in the hospital or somebody's having a funeral. And they tell me I was a very good youth worker with them. I was invited to a church. In fact, it happened to me this morning. I was invited to a church to talk to 7th and 8th graders. I shook. I no longer have those gifts. I no longer have those gifts. This morning, I didn't realize. I had read the scriptures for today for March 19th. And it wasn't until I came in here 10 minutes before the Mass this morning, looked at the readings, and I said, uh-oh, today is the feast of St. Joseph. I've been reflecting on the wrong readings. So it was less than 5 minutes before the Mass, so found out which gospel was being used, and I sat there for a few moments. And then all of a sudden I heard a lot of noise behind me. And all the kids were coming in. I said to Father, I haven't had a chance to really think about this. Could you do it? And he came up spontaneously and said what he said. And I'm sitting there going, yay. But how have your gifts changed? And that's where the fear comes in. When my gifts change, I don't want to let go of what I'm comfortable with. But it's going to force me to. Yeah. Your gifts change. I believe that God gives to any community. You have a mission. He gives you all the gifts you need. That all the gifts that is needed to carry out the mission of this parish are right here already because God has given them to us. What has happened in many problems is we become so dependent upon the priests that a lot of people don't use it. Father will take care of that. Father will take care of that. I once read an article called The Perfect Pastor. It might have been written about Father Mike, I'm not sure. But it was called The Perfect Pastor. And the guy writing the article said, we used to have the perfect pastor. He did everything. And then he got transferred. A couple of weeks after he was transferred, somebody went to him and said, Father, you're not working with the young people. He said, I don't have that gift. I get very anxious doing that. They said, well, somebody's got to work with the young. And they began looking around, see who had the gifts for it. And they began a youth program. It was wonderful. A couple of weeks later, somebody went to him and said, you're not Father, you're not visiting the elderly, housebound people. And again, they were furious and raged. They looked around, found people, and then began a program for the elderly. The guy writing the article said, we now have the most incompetent pastor, but the most vital parish. I would encourage every one of you, if you want to be a good minister of Christ, pray for the gift of incompetency. Some may have it naturally, I know that. But the incompetent people never do for others what they can do for themselves. When you think about gifts, I want you to think first, any experience of God you've ever had is a gift. Those special moments in your life when God was really present to you, that's a gift. And that wasn't given to you by God just to make you feel good. That was given to you by God to be used for others. When you think about your gifts, don't think of only what you can do, because there'll come a time in your life when you won't be able to do. Think of those gifts like compassion, listening, presence. When I go into a parish and I'm working with them around the issue of ministry, I always ask them the first question, when have you experienced ministry? When have you felt like somebody ministered to me? And then I get them to think about that experience. What was going on? Who did the ministry? What did they do? And I've done it in so many different cultures, but the answer always comes back. Primarily, I've been ministered to when somebody was compassionate to me. When somebody was compassionate. That's the essence of who Jesus was. Compassion. And when I said, what did they do? They listened. They were present with me at a time of great pain. They tried to understand my sufferings. It wasn't what they did, it was these qualities of just being with people. I want you to take a little bit of time right now and think, what are my gifts? What are my gifts? Don't tell me you don't have any, I won't believe you. I was working with a group of cloistered nuns one time. And they said, we don't have any gifts, we don't have any gifts. I said, well, go back and think some more. And then it took the community over a half hour to tell each one of them their gifts. What are my gifts? Think about it just for a moment. You will never know the fullness of your gifts by yourself. You need the community to know the fullness of your gifts. Is there anyone here who has a birthday this week? Who would admit it? A birthday this week? Anyone have a birthday in March? Oh, a whole bunch of you. Huh? Okay. I need somebody who's known by a good number of people in this parish. Who has the birthday? Say, anybody have a birthday this week? There are 3 of you. You're 1, 2, 3, I think I see. How am I going to do this? Who has the birthday closest to today? It was yesterday. When's your birthday? Today! Stand up and tell us who you are. How many of the people know her? Come on up. Come on up. No, excuse me. Are you willing to do this with me? I should tell you what you're getting into. I'm just going to ask you to share your gifts with this community. And then I'm going to ask this community to do one of 3 things. You can acknowledge her gifts. Tell me your name again.
Grace.
Grace. I had a wonderful Aunt Grace. Grace is going to share her gifts with us. And then you can acknowledge any of her gifts. You can say, if she said she has such and such a gift, you tell her, you say, yeah, that's one of your gifts, and this is where I saw it. One thing I will not do, if I'm doing it in a small group, I will ask you to question the gifts. If somebody says, I have a gift and you can't see it, well, you can question them. I used to live with one of our brothers who thought he had the gift of leading singing at Mass. He didn't have that gift. And nobody ever told him he didn't have that gift, so he was always frustrated and he made people frustrated. But here's the most important thing I want you to do with Grace. Tell her additional gifts that she hasn't mentioned about herself. Are you okay with that? Yeah. Okay. So those are 3 things. Affirm, not challenge, add additional gifts. But tell her where you've seen them. To say, oh, you have the gift of love, that means nothing. Grace, do you remember when this happened and you did that? That's the gift. Okay? I ask us just to place ourselves in God's presence. And remember that God has told us whenever we are gathered, He is right here among us. Grace, could I ask you just good and loud? No, I'm going to do better than that. Can I ask you, can you put that on? Am I? Thank you. I'll hold it so that helps. Okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Grace just to share the gifts she sees in herself. Take a moment. And many of you put your hand up and said you know Grace. Think right now, even before she starts, what are the gifts that I see in Grace? Okay?
Well, I would say listening, remembering, and telling the truth.
Go ahead.
I remember, Grace, when you came with...
So I'm going to ask you to stand up so people know.
I remember when you came with a classmate down to the Optimist Club and presented Shakespeare for us. And that was wonderful. Everybody just walked out of there and said, this is the best meeting we've ever had. And you were a great representative of the school.
Thank you.
Again, there are 2 women in the back. Get up. Could you tell her why you feel that?
Oh, I'm too tall for the albums now.
Go ahead.
He's actually here now.
As example of how the gifts change. Now that Grace is too tall to be a server, Grace is perhaps our youngest of the lectors who read at a daily mass for us on a continuing. And I always love how composed and poised you are as you walk up to the altar to say the prayers for us. And it becomes obvious to me, at least, that you have taken time before you get up there to prayerfully read it, because that's the way you present it to us.
Thank you.
Please.
My granddaughter is a friend of Grace, and I mentioned one day to Warren. Grace did the reading this morning. It was beautiful. She said, "You know, Granny, Grace is one of the nicest girls you would ever want to meet." And this is
You
coming.
didn't hear that. Her granddaughter, she said Grace had said the prayers that morning.
Yes.
Read the and she said she's just a wonderful person. And her granddaughter said Grace is the most wonderful person you would ever want to meet.
Grace, I remember you are a wonderful listener. And I remember when I was helping out at the school, didn't I encourage you to come in and sing? And didn't you sing? I remember you were a little too good of a listener, because when I would say, "Okay, do you understand that?" you would just not say anything. And then when you got up to the mic and you sang, you actually have very high capabilities to be a singer as well. So I hope you don't give that up. You have fun with that. That's the gift I remember you having as well.
One or two more. Is that your family in the back?
Yeah.
Behind me.
No, right. Yeah.
Grace and her family radiate the joy of the gospel. I see them twice a week at benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. She reads scripture well. She serves a true joy, a true love.
She sounds like Grace, you sound like the person I was describing to them yesterday that I want everybody to be. I'll take that back. Grace, as you listen to people share the gifts they see in you, what was your reaction? Let's see. No, you better hold on. Thank you. What was your reaction? Is there anything you want to respond to in what you heard?
I'm very, very thankful and grateful and humbled by.
Was there anything that somebody said that had special meaning to you?
Well, it's all very, very special to me.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Now, now I'll tell you the bad part of this. By the way, she said today's her birthday. I know families that on the birthday of anyone in the family, they do this. They do the gift discernment. You know, we talk about people giving people gifts. This is when they tell them the gifts they see in them. You also have a gift of courage. No, I mean that. When I said, "Would you be willing to come up here?" She said, "Yes." That's the gift, one of the gifts that you have. Once you know what your gifts are, now you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. If these are my gifts, how is God calling me to use them? And if these are my gifts, what do I have to do to develop them and strengthen them? And if these are my gifts, what do I need from you, my community, to be able to become more using those gifts? Thank you very much. Thank you, Nick. By the way, I hope you all noticed that I was going like this while she was talking. As we come to the end of this morning, I want you just to think. I believe that parishes should be helping everyone in the parish to know what their gifts are and to use those gifts. I would ask you as you go through today to ask yourself, and spend more time. What are my gifts? If you came with somebody in the car, a spouse or a friend, could I suggest that going back in the car, you take a few minutes just to begin to share with the other person the gifts you see in her or him. Spend some time thinking about that. And spend some time about the wisdom people. How can I become more like those people who I talked about? Thank you. See you tomorrow, I hope. Thank you very much.